development has been, for me, notoriously difficult to define in a way that can be comprehensive, and not just a general opinion, of which there are many. And I've had to expand my definition, but then narrow it down again. So there are two types of development I would generally talk about. One of them is the acquisition of skills, talents, particular niche abilities, right? And the second, I would say, is what I would roughly call cognitive development. So really, when you talk about cognitive typology, when you get right down to it, what you're doing when you say things like, for example, I'm going to develop FE, uh, that statement is really a statement about you know um, almost neural circuitry in a way. There are centers in the brain for processing speech and also for communication and for audible processing, and those centers themselves can be lacking, or they can be developed, and you can see this in EEG as well. And but in a way, it's the psyche itself is plastic, so it's not so much about what brain region you're going to develop as much as it is, can you utilize these abilities? So when you talk about development in that cognitive sense, somebody who is fully developed, and you can see this in voltology, would have a generally pretty fair utilization of JI signals with JE signals and PI and PE signals. And so, it would be fair game to read somebody and say, well, regardless of what skill sets they do or don't have, they have a nice robust brain. Their brain is working, in all of its faculties. There's nothing necessarily so lacking or one-sided about it, and that's a very good way to define development. And the content matter in this case is omitted for the sake of that definition. So now going back to the definition, which is more skill sets, etc. So let me use an example of somebody who, like Noam Chomsky, right? He was a difficult case for me because he seems, highly, versed in his field, very well educated, and he has his faculties about him. He doesn't seem like a poorly developed person for any means, but in a way, his skill set, his content matter, is very high. Yet he does lack in some base abilities. So, for example, he has this antagonistic relationship towards his FE, and he has this attitude, this antagonistic attitude towards rhetoric, towards persuasion. And I would now say, in this revised perspective, that Noam Chomsky isn't fully developed in the cognitive sense. He hasn't exercised mental faculties which would allow him that capacity and much more of a refined ability to move dynamics. He's also lacking in the any realm. So he might, for example, if put on the spot, not know how to be spontaneous, not to go with the flow. But he's rarely put in such situations where those sort of weaknesses would be exposed, because nobody asks him to do improv or anything like that. But he would nonetheless trip up or stutter in those situations. But so that would show the lack of development he has in those areas. But we just don't see it. But when you have both, when you have high concentration of content and education and skill sets, and when you have all the faculties around you, and you can see the signals in general proportion to one another, then that you have the highest capacity of development that I've seen to this date anyways. And I think that's a much more sound and measurable definition of development.